is this working? Invite the players to tell me, is this working for you? And often they will say, if we did this to the drill and changed it this way, that would be a lot more fun. And 9 times out of 10, I'll say, yeah, let's do that.
Welcome to the Way of Champions podcast. I'm your host, John O'Sullivan. Every week, we connect you with the top minds in the world of sports, coaching, leadership, and building championship programs so you can take your athletes and your teams to the next level. That was Peter Scales. This is John O'Sullivan, and you are listening to the Way of Champions podcast. Thank you for being here. If this is your first time, welcome to the Way of Champions. You only have 120-something episodes to catch up on, so hopefully you'll enjoy this one and realize that that's some good catching up to do. And if you are a long-time listener, thank you so much. It's been really cool week after week getting emails from a lot of you or connecting with the people who are our podcast champions and who are getting the transcripts and stuff about the different learning they've done from our different guests on the podcast. Now, we do a lot of team sports people here, but this week we have an individual sports person, and that's Dr. Peter Scales. And what's fascinating about Peter Scales is that though he is a USTA professional tennis coach, and he works with high school age athletes, he is internationally known as a developmental psychologist and a researcher and an author and a speaker, and is one of the world's foremost authorities on the positive development of children and youth. So he's worked in the education space for many, many decades, received his PhD back in 1976, and after publishing many books in that space, he just published a great book called Mental and Emotional Training for Tennis: Compete, Learn, and Honor. The 3 values that Peter really believes stand for everything that are part of his athletes and part of his programs. So in our conversation today, we talk about how his background as a developmental psychologist influences his coaching, how teachers are specifically trained for certain ages, yet oftentimes us coaches, we're generalists. And a great quote. I love this quote. This idea of only teach the kids whose worst instincts you find amusing. What a cool idea. It makes me laugh of all the kids that I've coached at different ages and stages. And oftentimes I feel burnt out on a team when their instincts I no longer find amusing. I feel like I need to move on. So I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. Maybe you'll come up with your own excuse box and some of these great tools that Peter has. We talk about body language and positive self-talk and how to instill that in our programs. We talk about thinking during practice and feeling during playing and lots of great stuff. So there's a lot of great stuff here. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll circle back around at the end of the podcast to tell you about our podcast champions through Patreon and a few other little details. But let's get started and jump right in with Dr. Peter Scales. Dr. Peter Scales, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast.
Glad to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
You and I first touched base. I was looking back through my emails, I think back in 2015 or 2016. So this has been a long correspondence that went from you sharing your background not only in coaching but in research and working as a developmental psychologist to congratulations, the publication of your first book. So congratulations.
Yeah, well, thank you. And the one small correction I'll make is it's my first book in the coaching world.
Your first coaching book.
But I've done a number of books in adolescent psychology, positive youth development, and so forth. So I've been authoring before, but this was a really new experience and a lot of fun to do the book on coaching.
Yeah. Let's, I think, begin today discussing your work with children, your work, all that. I think it's, over 250 research articles, and like you said, all those other books and book chapters. So you spent a lot of years and are one of the world's leading authorities on the development of children and youth, and that was really your focus, sort of outside of athletics, before you brought it into the sport realm. So maybe talk about that work and how that shaped you as a tennis teacher.
Yeah, definitely. I think what it really gave me was an appreciation of how you can't just have a one-size-fits-all approach to coaching, whether it's tennis or basketball or soccer or whatever sport. These, when you're talking about children and young adolescents and high school age adolescents and even young adults, there's a lot of changes going on, not just physically, obviously, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually. Things are changing rapidly, and you really need to be sensitive to the differences at each of those stages. And I think what happened for me was that I ended up specializing in middle school age kids and high school age kids. And I remember one of the colleagues I had along the way, Deborah Meyer, was a teacher in New York City, and she advised people, do not teach the kids whose worst instincts you don't find amusing. So, which is great advice. Don't be a teacher just because somebody told you to be a teacher. You think you have to be a teacher, and definitely don't teach middle school kids or high school kids unless you love being with those kids because of what they do and are, not in spite of it, because of it. So I've always been drawn to their inquisitive, exploring, trying things on for size, nature, their critical nature. I love that about, middle school and high school kids, want you to come up with the goods and not just do what you tell them to do. So I like to reinforce what it is they need as young human beings. And a lot of this comes from, that I apply to sport, comes from self-determination theory in psychology, which basically boils down, the needs of all human beings into a nice simple framework of ABCs. We all need autonomy, belonging, and competence. We need with autonomy. We need to feel we've got some control, some power, some choice, decision making in spheres of our lives that have meaning for us. We need to feel connected to others, belonging. We have to have good relationships, feel like we're loved and we can love others. And competence, we have to be good at things that really speak to our inner soul and that are valued positively by the people and society we're in. So if we give kids and grown-ups experiences that allow them to feel like they have those ABCs of, autonomy, feeling belongingness, and feeling competent, we're going to produce, whether it's in the classroom or on the basketball court or the tennis court or the football field, we're going to produce more chance of those young people playing to, thinking to the best of their potential, rather than them being disengaged, or in the case of youth sports, just quitting altogether.
Yeah. There's so much that you bring up in that little bit that I find interesting. I'm like back and forth. I'm writing down notes. I'm like, okay, what path do I take this down first? And because these are all topics that we talk about a lot here. And maybe I'll start with this, is just backing all the way up and saying, what's interesting is certainly in teaching, we realize that there's an age and an area of expertise, right? So people do train to be an elementary education or focusing on high school age students or whatever. But only recently in coaching has that come about. Me being a soccer coach, they've just in the last 2 years released sort of grassroots licenses where they said, this is how you coach a 6-year-old who's playing this size. And I think, we in coaching, sometimes we become such generalists that we miss out on some of the most important age-specific stuff. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, in tennis, we've done a similar thing with the United States Tennis Association, the USTA, the folks who put on the US Open in August and September, where in the last few years, tennis has really embraced kid-sized rackets, balls that are bigger and have less pressure in them. So they can maintain rallies longer. They can find the sweet spot more often. They can have more fun. Fun. Yeah. And that's what keeps kids in the game is fun. And so, and the courts are lined to be smaller. So everything is designed to give them feelings of success, competence, right? Mm-hmm. And lots of game-based teaching, which gives them a sense of belonging and connecting with others, having fun with them. And as much, hey, what do you want to do, with the next 5 minutes? We have this we can do, we have this we can do. And have the kids have a voice in it, which helps build their autonomy. So even at the age of 6 or 7, you can be, building these things in ways that, naturally you then can grow on those as kids get older. You give them more voice. We have drills that I'll say, here's the drill. Here's how we're gonna, score it and whatever, and we'll play it for a few minutes. And I always invite, is this working? Invite the players to tell me, is this working for you? And often they will say, if we did this to the drill and changed it this way, that would be a lot more fun. Mm-hmm. And 9 times out of 10, I'll say, yeah, let's do that. Mostly because, number one, they're almost always right. They've had a good idea. And number two, because I want to say yes to their ideas as much as I can to have them really be engaged in it and feel ownership of it, that it isn't my practice, it's theirs. Mm-hmm. It's their practice.
Mm-hmm. It's their team, it's their practice.
It's their team. Yeah. It's not my team. It's not even our team, although I do say us and we and our a lot, but it belongs to the players, and I want the players to take ownership and that sense of autonomy and responsibility. In my book, I quote the NFL star Joe Ehrman, who wrote this great book, Inside Out Coaching, and I use one of his things as a handout in our seasons, and it is the difference between being on the team and being a teammate. You've written about this and spoken about this a lot too, about the difference between the player whose primary concern, or the parent of the player, whose primary concern is playing time. Mm-hmm. And in sports that have positions, at which position, and versus the player or the parent who is, I'll do anything coach wants me to do. I'll do anything the team needs me to do for the betterment of the team. I trained as a first baseman, but I'll play short if the coach needs me to, if my team needs me to. That kind of thing. I was a star in high school. I was the highest scorer on my basketball team. I'm willing to be the sixth guy, sixth girl off the bench, because that's what my team needs. That's the kind of player you want on your team. And so we build that gradually, not by just telling them that that's a good philosophy, but by putting the players in a position where they're making decisions based on the needs of the team and not on their own needs. So it's put into action.
Mm-hmm. And I think we just had an amazing example of that in the Women's World Cup here with the United States, where, half tongue in cheek, some people would say the second best team in the tournament was the U.S.'s second string, right? Chuckle, chuckle, laugh, laugh. But in all likelihood, that second 11 probably could have at least made the final 8, if not the final 4, right? Yeah. And so you've got players like a Carly Lloyd, who is a 2-time World Player of the Year, coming off the bench. Lindsey Horan played every single game except the final, right? You know, Kristen Press, Mallory Pugh, these great athletes who have to accept, what is my role in this group, and can I be ready in that moment? Ali Krieger comes on as right back at halftime of the final because of a head injury, right? If she spent the whole tournament moping that she wasn't starting, she's not ready to come into a 0-0 game at halftime in the World Cup final. And I think that team has talked over and over about what you're just saying is it wasn't about being on the team, it was about being a great teammate. And that's why they were successful.
Well, and here's the point that I try and make in the book, is that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to be that great teammate instead of just being on the team if you have not lost your focus on yourself. If you have maintained focus on your ego and your needs, and even to the point of winning and losing, and we can get into that as well, but a lot of the emphasis of my book and how I coach is every day we start our practice with the principles that are the chapter titles of my book. They're laminated on huge newsprint, and they're up on the fence, the tennis fence. And we start every day talking about what compete, learn, and honor means as our motto. And then there's usually one or two other mental and emotional strengthening principles we put up on the fence, and we talk about them. But every one of these is about ultimately coming back to two things: losing yourself and being humble, because humility allows you to learn, and loving the game more than how you do at it, more than how you perform. In a tennis example recently, Wimbledon is still going on, of course, while we're taping this. And Rafa Nadal played the young Australian Nick Kyrgios, who's got, oodles of talent and a hard time as a 24-year-old acting like a grown-up. And Nadal was asked what stands in the way of him being a Grand Slam champion. And Nadal was very clear, as he always is, and said that the most important difference between champions and others is the love and the passion for the game. The game is more important than you are. And if you're ever going to be a great teammate, and ironically, if you're ever going to reach your potential as an individual athlete, you must come to the spiritual place of acceptance and belief and celebration that the sport you're playing is bigger than you are. That's it. It matters more than you do. And that's the key to almost everything in my book about being an honorable athlete, being an athlete who's an open, curious, and humble learner, and being one who competes 100% of the time, enjoying solving the puzzles. And just, one of your other podcast guests, Ted Creighton, talked about the pure joy of playing, the pure joy of playing. You're out there because it's fun. That's the bottom line. And even pros have to remind themselves that they started this journey long ago because it was fun. And it met a deep need in their soul. to do this. It kind of developed them from the inside out. Something about soccer spoke to you, John.
Mm-hmm.
You know, something about tennis, even though I got connected with tennis late in life at age 42, something about it just instantly spoke to me and met spiritual needs for me.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so you've got to love the game more than how you perform, and you've got to lose yourself in order to do these things that we've been talking about doing, and being ready to come in when you've sacrificed for your team, being ready to play the role that your team needs you to play.
Yeah, there's a great quote, and I know I got it from one of your articles, and I'm sure some form of it's in your book. And on that same thing that Nadal said, it was Boris Becker saying, "I love the winning, I can take the losing, but most of all, I love to play." And
Yeah.
I find in my role that is one of the hardest things to get across to parents of young athletes these days when they're like, what do you think about my kid? I'm like, does she love to play? Does he love to play? Do they pick up a ball outside of practice? Because if they don't, like, the alarm bells should be going off, right? And this is, I think, that sort of that, what was the research? The rage to mastery, is like, they just want to get better, but they want to be around it. And as Ted Creighton said, and they just love to play. And if we can create that environment where we're telling them, okay, it's time to come in now, that's when you should feel great about yourself, not when you had to beg your kid and bribe them to go out in the backyard and practice for 20 minutes.
That's exactly it. When they're asking to extend practice because we want to play another round of this game, and so the parents have to wait a few extra minutes to drive them home. You've had a successful practice that day when the players themselves are asking for more because they're having so much fun.
Yeah. I love it when my kids are like, "Wait, what time is it? Why are we done?" I'm like, "Well, we're already gone 10 minutes over." And they're like, "Oh, really?"
Yeah.
And that's a great feeling as a coach. I think you're like, okay, well, at least for that kid, I did something right today.
Well, and here's the analogy, though, John. The same way we're talking about the athlete, him or herself, needing to have that experience of pure joy, coaches have to be in that space. You shouldn't be doing this unless going out there and being with those kids, or if you're coaching adults, being with those adults is just really lighting a fire for you and energizing you and making you smile and just really helping give your life real purpose, so that time does fly by. You're in that state of flow where you're not conscious of time. You're not watching the clock. You're busy. I mean, I watch the clock a little bit during practice as a coach because I've got to manage the time I have with my athletes and make sure we're covering basically the things that I'd like us to cover at that point in their development. Mm-hmm. But I'm not being rigid about it either. I'm also taking my cue from which of the things I'm inviting my players to do are they doing, but they're doing it for me, and they're not really, having a great time with it. And which of the things I've invited them to do are they already taking ownership of and, making it their own game as if it was a pickup game. Mm-hmm. That tells me, okay, those are the ones I'm going to emphasize more the next time. And so I'm always listening to the signals that the players are giving about what is striking a chord with them, because there's lots of ways of getting the skill development done. There's not any one drill that you have to do. There's lots of ways in every sport to get the skill worked on. So coaches, we have a wealth of ideas because of our training, but the athletes are the ones who are executing these things. So I'm always looking for their feedback, their indirect feedback, which is how happy are they, how engaged are they, how much are they trying, are they laughing, are they, time going by and they don't want to stop. Can we do this more?
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a winner now.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question that weaves together, I think, your expertise in child development and then a lot of years working with schools of how can we, right? Too many schools are just how can we push these kids through versus like how can we make them excited about learning, and I know that's what you're passionate about. Mm-hmm. When I was a young coach, I don't know if this word's too strong, but sometimes I almost felt offended when a kid wasn't excited to get better like I wanted him or her to be. And I would kind of take that personally, not necessarily a positive way. I think after 20-something years of coaching now, when I bring, and I obviously work in soccer, so it's a team thing, and I'm a firm believer that we don't gather in groups to work as individuals, right? We gather to work as a group, and then you can do your individual stuff when you go home on your own. But what I've come to be okay with is the fact that some kids will never pick up a ball when they go home. And I'm okay with that now. We're moving forward with this group. My job when the group comes together is hopefully to make this so exciting and so engaging that they want to go pick up a ball when they get home. But I used to coach in a way where I said, oh, that kid didn't pick up a ball all week long, so now we have to teach everyone all the stuff that he was supposed to be doing. Is that making any sense? And, from an educational standpoint, I guess two parts. What do you do to do your best to engage everybody, and then at what point do you have to move on and hopefully hope they'll keep up?
Well, yeah, and you're exactly right, and it's a difficult balance. I think it's different when you're giving a lesson to an individual player. Right before this conversation we're having now, I was giving an individual tennis lesson. So that's a whole different setup than when you're working with a team. But on any team, you're going to have degrees of engagement. And some of it is going to manifest itself at practice. Some of it is going to be what you just described, that there are going to be some kids who leave the field of play and then they'll go home and want to do a pickup game after they finish their homework. And, they're that motivated, they're that driven by it. What I encourage my players to do is to understand one thing. You are the boss of your, in my case, tennis career. Okay? You're the boss of your soccer career, of your basketball career. You, as an athlete, whether you're 7 years old or 17 or 27, you are the one making the choices, the decisions. It's your choice every day about how hard you're going to work, how closely you're going to pay attention, whether you take notes or not, whether you then study your notes from practice, whether you play or take lessons outside of practice, how much you consume on the internet of additional learning, teaching that you can do. All these things are choices. It's your choice about how you react emotionally to difficult circumstances on the playing field, to wins and losses, or to somebody cheating during play, or to not getting the playing time you think you deserve in a sport that works like that. All of these things are choices. And so what I constantly encourage them to do is make the choices that work for you, but recognize that you also must, as a member of the team, you must make choices that work for the team. So I ask for your full engagement while we're in practice, because if you're not paying attention and you're not trying hard in your role, that makes it harder for your teammates to do well in their roles and to learn and to have fun. So let's all, be for each other while we're here in practice, and then it's your choice about how you supplement that. But no one's making you do any of this. I don't want you here because your parents want you to be here. I don't want you here because all your friends are doing it and so you have to do it. or because you think you're going to get a scholarship, and you're here because of the potential for money in the end. Mm-hmm. I want you to be here because you love this game. Period. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And show your love the way you would show your love to anything else that you love. You care for it, you nurture it, you spend time on it, you're respectful of it, all of those things. So if you're not any of that, then you don't really love it.
I think that's really, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's that. I'm just going to repeat myself if you don't stop.
I think that's such an important thing, and I think one of the things that we can do within our practices is that the game, or in your case, the match, tells you over and over what's not working, right? So if you can't get a first serve in tennis, that should be telling you that you need to do something more on your first serve, right? And I can coach you, and maybe it's your toss or your footwork or whatever, but there's got to be a time where you're going to go home and spend some extra time on that, right? And in soccer, it might be that you can't trap a ball, or you can't cross a ball, or you can't shoot. Now, the soccer kids I coach now, they just had a month off. And some of them I know have gone and said, these are things I need to work on. And when I come back and coach sees me next time, I'm going to be better at this. And some of them have chosen to, eat marshmallows. And that's their choice. And one of the things that I try to get across to them is, if you make the choice to eat marshmallows one time, that's fine. But there's an aggregation of choices, and you have to own that choice, because if that's the choice that you're making again and again and again and again and again, eventually someone's going to surpass you and potentially take your spot, and you have to live with that. And I feel like it's my job as a coach to point out that might happen, but eventually they have to take ownership of what they're going to do about it.
That's exactly it, and and that it doesn't work with every young athlete, and it's not possible to get through with every athlete, just like it's not possible for a classroom teacher to get through to every single student. We're going to have, not everything we do is a success in relationships or in construction or in writing or in music. But you've got to do the work. I was thinking the other day, I was listening to the jazz station on Sirius XM, on Christian McBride, the bassist, has this program where he interviews other, really accomplished jazz players. And they play a little bit, but they talk a lot. And they talk a lot about how the jazz musicians grew up, how they developed. And to a person, all of the men and women that he's interviewed talk about how they all wanted to sit in and play a set with their idols. The horn players wanted to sit in with Miles Davis and play with him. But they, to a person, talk about they didn't dare ask to sit in for a set unless they had done the homework and they had memorized the songs that Miles Davis played. Now, they couldn't play like Miles Davis, but they had to know what he played, what was the playbook, and do the homework off the stage. It wasn't just about rehearsing on the stage, but off the stage. Understand where the music came from, why the composer wrote it the way he or she did, what the meaning of it was. Really get it into your soul and really invest your soul in it. And then when they're ready to be given their opportunity, they're ready to do what they need to do. So, the analogy is if you're the sixth person in basketball and you're warming the bench a lot, are you spending your time memorizing the playbook? When you're called on, have you done the work? Have you done the work? So that when coach puts you in, you don't only know what you're supposed to do in your position on the court, you know what the play is, what your other four players are going to be doing, so that as a team, you can make the play work. That's the kind of player I want to put in.
Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that we have this transitional period in sport, and sadly we live in a society where people are like, it's all one or the other, right? And so certainly when you're working with 7-year-olds, you're going to get into the game, right? And you're going to probably play half the game at least, because that's what we do with 7-year-olds, because we don't expect them all to be, to have that playbook conversation with them. But by the time you get into high school, your athlete has to be mature enough to understand that if I'm not putting in the extra to catch up, or if I'm not controlling all the things that I can control, then I'm not going to get the playing time. And I think we have a lot of parents in this day and age that are very protective of allowing their child to fall below the standard and yet still demand, they still want their kid to be part of the outcome without doing all the work to get to be part of the outcome, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And again, Nadal, I quote in the book about, the most important thing is not the winning and the losing. It's enjoying the work, and trying to improve as a player and as a person. And that's what I tell our parents at the start of the season, as obviously I tell the kids, but an email, I email parents a lot throughout the season, and the opening communication is about our philosophy of compete, learn, and honor. And honor comes first. And part of all of this is when you become a teammate on this team, honor is the foundation for everything. Just like your eyes are the foundation for sports. Your feet can't kick the ball in soccer. Your hands can't move the racket in tennis unless your eyes have seen something down the field or on the other side of the court. Your eyes work first. In the same way, honor, being respectful to all, honoring that the game is bigger than you, and that you're never going to be a master, you're never going to be an expert, you're going to know more than other people, relatively, but you never master the game. The game is bigger than you, it lives on after you do, and so you have that sense of it, and you cannot therefore take it personally. Everything about this is not taking it personally. When we want our players to make mistakes, it's not only okay to fail and make mistakes, it's essential. And I tell the parents this, they're going to have to make mistakes if they want to explore what better tennis is about, and what recovering from mistakes and being resilient is about on and off the tennis court, in the rest of their lives. So we will encourage and put them in situations where they're making mistakes as part of the process of getting better and developing.
And you published that letter in your book as well, your preseason letter, which I think is really cool because that's very practical. Like, someone can read that. And what I like about the letter is it's very clear in the word you use is the expectations of the athlete and the expectations of the parent, right? And right. So you can't tell me you didn't know this, right? And you're here to be more like us. We're not going to give up everything that we do so that you can just do what you want to do.
Yeah, it's difficult because we're embedded in a culture that prizes winning. You wrote about this years ago, in one of your first blogs about, the first question is, did you win? Mm-hmm. When somebody tells you they played a game or a match, did you win? And I literally teach our players. We use a fake post-match interview to kind of get them used to this. That, how did you do today? Mm-hmm. Well, the mentally strong answer is I played hard and to the best of my ability today, and we had a good match. I don't want the first response to be I won or lost. Right. And so this is an education process for the parents as well as for the players, and to help them understand that this doesn't mean we're not trying to win. We want to win. We're training to win. We prefer to win. Okay, it's not, that's what the Boris Becker quote is about. I like the winning. Winning's okay. I can take the losing. Losing's part of it. We lose a lot, but most of all, I love to play. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we want to win, but the winning and the losing is not what we're about here. We're about improving. Improving is a better goal than winning because, as you alluded to a couple of minutes ago, you can control whether you improve or not. That's a choice. You cannot control whether you win or lose. You have an opponent. You have conditions. You have things that are completely out of your control.
And tennis is a hard sport, like soccer.
Yeah.
If you're a swimmer, you can lose and swim your personal best and feel like, okay, I'm getting better. But in tennis, you could play your best match and lose 6-love, right?
Yes.
And soccer, you can play a great match and lose by 4 goals. And so, in these sports where so much of the result is out of our control, more than 50% of it, really.
Yes.
This focus on the process is, I think, even more important.
It is, and there's something else that connects to this, and of course, all of these things are connected in one giant Venn diagram in some way. Or a Ferris wheel, or I'm not coming up with the right metaphor, but they're all connected, all these principles. But one of the things that is really important is to the players have to understand that their value as a human being doesn't depend on winning and losing. Mm-hmm. We have the preference for winning, yes. It's more fun to win than to lose, to have that celebration. We can learn from both winning and losing, and we're about improving as players and people. That's our primary goal. But I sometimes, in match situations, where tennis is, interesting because we don't, at the recreational level, we don't really have timeouts like the way we can do some on-court coaching in the women's game now in tennis professionally. Mm-hmm. But we can call our players over to the fence in between odd games on changeovers, and they're changing sides of the court. And I very rarely talk about technique during those changeovers because, I don't want them thinking a whole lot while they're playing. I want them feeling and playing by instinct. Practice is the time for thinking. But I will, and I have often taken them over to the fence, called them over, and all I've said is, that I still love you whether you win or lose. How you do in this match has nothing to do with what I think of you. Mm-hmm. So have fun with it. It's a puzzle. Try and take it like a surgeon, clinically. What's wrong with this serve, or why am I not volleying correctly? Or if you're playing basketball, why are all my free throws going off to the left? There's a reason. There's laws of physics that operate in every one of these things. There's reasons happening. There's psychology happening. So figure out what it is. Mm-hmm. That's part of the fun of playing the game, is not focusing on, I'm this close to winning, I'm this close to losing. For the entire game or the entire match, the focus has to be on right now in the present, solving the puzzle, that the game is presenting to me right at this moment today. And the reason we do that and place such a great emphasis on that in my coaching is that it depersonalizes. It makes it much easier for players to accept mistakes and failure in a real match compared to practice, when they are convinced that what the coach thinks of them does not depend on their winning and losing. And I use the word love. I say, I love you whether you win or lose. Mm-hmm. I want to see full competitive effort. I want to see open curious learner and I want to see respect and honor, do those things, yes. But whether you win or lose, it hasn't. But here's the thing: if you're focusing on solving the puzzle, right, and focusing on the present moment, not what just happened, not what's about to happen, what's happening right now, then you can take advantage of a momentum shift, because in every athletic contest, there can be a momentum shift at any moment, and you don't know which point, which play, which possession that momentum shift can happen on. You have to be ready to walk through that moment and take advantage of that as an athlete. And you can't do it if you're whining about how poorly you just did the last play, or worried about your next play, or any other of distracting thoughts about winning and losing. You can only be ready to take care of that momentum if you're fully in the present and fully into a problem-solving mode.
Mm-hmm. I love that, and yeah, that, or Jerry and I call it, IPR, immediate positive response. Like, let's go. And,
yeah.
and you talk about that, and this is something I think is really important. What you break down your book into those three core values: that honor, learn, and compete. And one of the things that you talk about under honor that I think is hugely important is this idea of, you call it, use positive self-talk and show positive body language. So talk about that for a second. I want to discuss that because of something that just happened recently with me.
Oh, this is huge, because we have, well, in tennis there's throwing the racket. There's as a real easy, and baseball and softball, you can disgustedly throw your bat down if you strike out. There's that kind of body language. Less exaggerated, there's the slumping shoulder. When you feel dejected about something you've done, or you're awfulizing what just happened, and you're slumped down and you're shuffling slowly, your eyes are looking down to the ground. And I tell my players, if I'm your opponent, I love to see you losing control, throwing things, or being so dejected that your body language is like you're about to fall down, because that means I'm in control of this contest now. I've got you. I want to be able to watch you as a competitor and not know if you're winning and losing. I want your posture to be upright and energized, your eyes focused where they need to be focused on the playing field, at the correct spot. I want to see footwork, light on the feet, being graceful and balanced, and focusing on those kinds of things instead of thoughts about winning and losing. And just really a sense of engagement and quiet, relaxed strength when I look at you. I don't need to see, kind of loud, boisterous demonstration of strength. I need a quiet, dignified, but relaxed and energized exhibition of confidence. Not cockiness, confidence.
Well, my issue, my personal one recently was, just with a group where some of them showed up, before we even started. It wasn't bad body language, during a match. It was before the match even started. Sort of, you're telling all your teammates that you don't want to be here. Right. And you are not happy, and you would rather be anywhere else, and you don't like them, and you don't care. And there's, that to me, that's kind of one of the things that I have discovered about myself. I take very personally, and it sets me off personally, because hey, I worked really hard to prepare a practice. I want you to show up with a learner's attitude and everything like that. And my balance, what I'm working on, is sort of to approach. You have to call the behavior or the body language what it is in the moment it happens, right? You can't allow it to happen, because then you're condoning it. but also trying to confront it with sort of a, hey, it's not, you know, you don't seem to be yourself today the way you're holding. Is everything okay? Because certainly, you know, I work with, you know, you talk about working with middle schoolers, and that's who I work with. And if you work with middle school girls, you know, something probably happened during the school day.
Oh yeah.
You know, so they're bringing that baggage to practice. It's in their body language, and it's nothing that I did or their teammates did, but yet they're about to drag down the whole training session for 16 other people if I don't confront that behavior. So how do you go about doing that?
Well, you know, this is a hard thing for coaches because a lot of you know, we have a limited amount of time at practices. We might have anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours, and you have a couple of hours. You've got some announcements. You've got, you know, things get away from you quickly in time management if you're not, you know, being careful about it, and so this is a very hard one to do. But I like to build in, and this is high school. I like to build in the first few minutes are their minutes to have their snack and to talk to me about anything they want to talk to me about. And I just listen. And the guys don't take advantage of this as much as the girls do. But they're coming out of school after a long day at school. They started the day too early in most high schools, which is developmentally out of sync with what teenagers need. So they're hitting the lowest part of their day at 2:45 when they're coming to practice. So they're not energized. They've got all these other distractions and pieces of baggage that they're carrying from school, whether it's academic or friends or, you know, whatever, family stuff that's boiling over all day long. They bring everything. And I need to give them a few minutes, 5, 6, 7 minutes, which some coaches will say, I can't do that. That's too much time. But I give them 5, 6, 7 minutes to just have your snack, get re-energized, get something off your chest if you have to. I'm going to be there to listen. And then we, you know, go out on the court. And I supplemented that one year with what I call the excuse box. And I actually I got a box and I wrote excuse box on it because I was so tired of the excuses my guys were making on the tennis court. And I put it there and I said, either do it on paper, write your excuses for the day down. You know, I hate my English teacher and I can't get her out of my mind. Write that down on paper, crumble it up and throw it in the box, or do it metaphorically. Just do it in your head and pretend to throw it in the box. But put your excuses there because the tennis court is an excuse-free zone. Okay, when we go out there, we're just going to have fun and we're going to take responsibility and we're not going to blame anything on outside excuses. So between the excuse box on the court and the listening session before they get on the court, I think I help most, not all, most of my players make the transition. And sometimes, I mean, there's things going on, and you have to put your practice in the hands of some other players who can help run it and spend some time talking with a player who's having an issue that's more serious than that, you know? So that's part of it, of what you have to do. I mean, I talk in the book about players needing to adjust, adapt, and survive. Because particularly sports like tennis, soccer, basketball, very open skill, dynamic. They're more like jazz music than classical music. You're improvising all the time. So you've got to adjust and adapt and survive. Well, coaches have to too. You've got to have a lesson plan for every practice, a season plan, and a practice plan for every practice. But then you've got to be willing to detour as the needs of your players as a team and as individuals tell you need to do in order to do what Steve Wilkinson, the winningest coach in college, tennis coaching history said was to be a servant to the team and not their leader as a coach. You can't serve the team if you're rigid about your lesson plan as a coach, your practice plan. Mm-hmm. You've got to have the willingness to adjust and adapt, just like you're asking your players to adjust and adapt in the contest. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, sometimes you've got to work a little differently than you planned, but that helps. Those things help.
Yeah, I like that. And again, that's a sort of standard that you set out before it even happens. That, Anson Dorrance from North Carolina women's soccer would talk about sort of practice has started, and he'd give the kids like a lap, right? And it was like they would run, a quarter of the field, stop, stretch a bit, run a half, stop, stretch a bit, finish the thing, stop, stretch. And then, once they got back to him, all the talk, everything that you brought to the field is now done, and we're all here. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's how he gave them their time. So they knew that when they arrived back at midfield, everything was put to rest. Right. Yeah. And the leaders would do this. And I like your thing of, hey, we give you this 6 minutes, but then we come together, and whatever that signal is, Jerry and I use a lot, just the circle. We come together in a circle, and we can all look at each other in the eye, and that means practice has started. And that now we are 100% present and focused, and that body language and the bad English teacher and all those excuses are now gone. And by doing that consistently over and over and over, you just establish that routine, and then also that standard that you look at a player and say, hey, remember, we're done with that now. Right? Yeah. You are here now, or leave, but you can't be here while you're still mentally there.
Right. That's exactly it. And for us, it's the excuse box is at the entry to the court, and the mental and emotional strengthening principles led every day by compete, learn, honor are up on the fence. And the very first thing we do, we walk on the court, we see the excuse box. Sometimes we sit, sometimes we stand, but we talk. The very first thing we talk about compete, learn, honor, and the other mental strengthening habit of the day. Mm. And that's the start of practice. That's the focus.
Love it. Well, we've already almost used an hour here, and I want to give you a chance to, is there anything that you wished I talked about that I didn't or didn't ask you? Anything from the book that you really want our listeners to get as a takeaway from our conversation here today?
Well, I think we've covered a great amount of ground. I think the main lesson from the book is, for coaches, you're trying to help your young athletes fall in love with the sport. That's more important than the technique. I think we spend an awful lot of time on X's and O's, and we need to. But the real goal, particularly for the overwhelming majority of our youth sports participants who are not going to be making their living playing the sport, is the joy of the sport, the physical activity of it, the tremendous opportunity to feel the exhilaration of a close match or a close game, win or lose, and trying to compete at your very best with an opponent who's trying to compete at her very best or his very best. That joy and that pleasure and it being a part of you that you fall in love with. That's my goal. I got an email from one of my dads, dad of one of my players on the girls team who I'm giving lessons to this summer, and he wrote that she walks off the court feeling more confident every time and with a smile on her face. Well, okay, I'm good with that. That's it. Mm-hmm. That's it right there. Oh, and by the way, she's actually getting better in the process. But I'm trying to make it so much fun and so clear a it's all about compete, learn, honor, and whether you win or lose does not change what I think of you as a human being. That she walks off the court with a smile every time. I've done my job. If they're walking off the court feeling more confident as people and they're smiling, I'm okay. That's good enough for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's such a great thing, and that's been the theme of our whole talk here is, the athlete has to love it, and the parent or the coach, that's our goal as well. Help our kids fall in love with the sport, because that's the greatest indicator of whether they'll show up and practice enough and care enough to actually get good at it, isn't it?
That's right. And frankly, from the standpoint of growing, expanding youth sports, not just staying in it, but as they get older, teaching their brothers and sisters, and maybe even being coaches themselves and helping out, staying in the game, in some way, shape, or fashion. That's a wonderful thing to see, and that helps us grow participation instead of, when they reach middle school age and high school age, they drop out in droves because it's all about, winning and travel teams and all this other stuff that has very little to do with spiritual growth and growth as improving as a human being.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that. Well, Peter, how can people find your book? How can they find your website and connect with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it's available at Amazon. And if you like it, get it at Amazon. If you like it, leave a nice review. That would be great. It's also available at coacheschoice.com. And my website is usptapro.com, Peter Scales. And you can find me on that.
Awesome. Well, this has been really interesting, and I highly recommend. I got to read an early copy of the book, some of the chapters that you put into articles, and have the final copy sitting here on my desk. And it's really good. What I like about it as well is the way you break it down. I think it's a book with multiple entry points as well, which is the type of book I like, so I can look at it and say, have a game plan, routines. That's something my athletes need, and I can dive right in there as well, which I think is really, really cool. So it's a great book, and I hope that not just the tennis people, but I think any coach will get some good stuff from this. So, Peter, great job, and thanks for all that you do and all the research you've done for the last few decades to make schools better, and now to make us teachers and sport coaches better too.
Oh, well, I appreciate it, John, and thanks for having me on and continuing to do all the great stuff you do with Jerry and your other partners. It's really needed, and I continue to look forward to looking at the blogs and listening to the podcasts and just benefiting from all those resources that you're putting together, too.
Well, thank you, Peter. I hope you enjoyed that. Again, you can find Peter at usptpro.com/Peter Scales. You can find his book, Mental and Emotional Training for Tennis, on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It's published by Coach's Choice. I suggest you look up the book. It's really good. Got a lot of really good, useful information because of Peter's extensive background in working with children and all that perspective that he brings to the coaching realm. So thanks for listening. Again, if you have heard about our podcast champion group, we have almost 50 people now on our Patreon page who are getting transcripts of the podcasts, who are getting the opportunity to submit questions and get their questions answered by James and Jerry and myself, and some other pretty cool stuff coming up with that group as soon as we hit 50. So if you're interested in really supporting the podcast, helping to keep it ad-free, become a podcast champion, go to Patreon, patreon.com/Way of Champions, and check that out. Okay? So thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great episode. I think a really special episode next week. I think you're going to like it. So thanks, Peter Scales, and thank all of you, for listening and supporting our work. And remember, your influence is never neutral. Go out there, make a difference. We'll see you next week.